My daughter beamed in her wedding dress, but 2 days later, I saw the truth. Her husband pushed papers across my table, demanding I declare every dollar of my wife's $6.8 million estate. My heart sank, then burned with fury. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a smile at your family table. What I did next changed everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in the living room that evening, the old clock ticking softly on the wall, its hands moving slowly as if mocking the heavy silence around me. The air smelled faintly of Maggie's favorite lavender polish that I still used on the wooden floors. My eyes wandered to the framed photographs on the mantel. Emily in her cap and gown, Emily holding the keys to her first car, Emily walking down the aisle just days ago with Daniel by her side. And now, only a breath after that wedding, I was staring at a contract that could strip away everything Maggie and I had built. I leaned back in the chair I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. Every dent in the wood told a story. Every scratch belonged to a memory. My fingers brushed against the armrest, smooth in some places, rough in others, and I whispered softly, "Maggie, do you see this? Do you see what they're trying to do to us?" My voice cracked, but the house held my words the way she used to hold my hand, quietly, patiently, with no answers but steady comfort. I remembered the years we gave to Emily. I remembered writing that first tuition check, $60,000 for her college degree. I was proud, so proud, because I never had that chance myself. I had worked long nights at the mill, overtime shifts that left my back aching and my eyes burning, but I told myself it was worth it. She would have the opportunities I never did. Then came the car, a $25,000 sedan, not flashy, but safe, reliable, meant to carry her to her first job interviews, to her independence. And later, the wedding. Dear God, the wedding. Maggie and I spent tens of thousands to make it beautiful. We rented that old country estate with its wide lawn, the string lights hanging like stars across the evening sky. Maggie said it should be the happiest day of her life. And I agreed. But now, only days after the flowers had withered and the cake was gone, Daniel slid that envelope across my table. My daughter smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if asking me to hand over part of Maggie's $6.8 million inheritance was a formality, a signature away. My heart twisted, not because of the money itself, but because of what it meant, that all our sacrifices had been reduced to ink on paper, to legal terms designed to bleed me dry. I looked around the house again. The place itself was worth $700,000 now, though to me it was priceless. I had built the deck in the back with my own hands. Maggie planted every rose in the garden, pruning them carefully each spring. Inside, the walls carried our lives. Photographs, little souvenirs from trips, Emily's childhood drawings still pinned behind glass. This house wasn't just property. It was memory. It was love. It was the weight of years lived together. And suddenly, it was all in danger. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Emily had looked at Daniel with such trust when he mentioned the contract. Her eyes sparkled the way Maggie's used to when she believed in someone completely. That hurt me more than the papers themselves. My daughter, the one I carried through storms and sleepless nights, the one I sacrificed everything for, nodded along as though this stranger, this man she had only just married, knew better than her father. I clenched my fists, feeling the anger rise. I whispered again to Maggie, all those nights, all those checks I wrote, all those promises we kept, and this is how it comes back. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, thick as smoke, hard to breathe through. I had seen greed before, from men at work, from neighbors fighting over land, but never in my own home, never sitting across from my daughter's smile. For a long moment, I felt small, like a relic of a past no one respected anymore. Maybe Daniel thought I was too old, too tired to fight back. Maybe Emily thought I would just sign because it was easier. The thought stung, but it also sharpened something in me. I realized silence would not save me. If I said nothing, they would take everything. They would take Maggie's legacy and twist it into their own. And in that painful clarity, I began to see Daniel for what he was. Not a husband protecting his new family, not a man planning for the future, but a predator circling what he believed to be easy prey. He did not love Emily the way a man should. He loved what she represented, the money, the inheritance, the control. It was written all over his smooth smile. In the careful way, he used words like asset alignment and trust distribution. He wasn't building a family, he was building a cage, and he thought I would lock myself inside it. I stood slowly, the ache in my knees reminding me of the years I had given away to hard labor. My eyes scanned the bookshelf, the old desk in the corner. There, tucked between stacks of letters, was the folder of Maggie's old life insurance papers. I pulled it out, brushing dust off the cover. Inside were documents that had carried us through hard times, signatures that reminded me of our promises to each other. I held the folder close, and in that moment I remembered what Maggie once told me. "John, protect what we've built. Don't let anyone take it from us." My voice trembled as I whispered back to her spirit, "I will, Maggie. I promise you, I will." The sorrow inside me began to harden into something else, something steadier. The shock gave way to clarity, the grief gave way to resolve. They thought I was weak, that I would cave under pressure. But they had no idea who I really was. I wasn't just some old man with a fading memory. I was the man who had worked 3 jobs to pay off this house. I was the man who had kept every bill paid, every loan cleared, who had carried this family on my back when times were lean. And I was still that man. My eyes landed on the small wooden box in the drawer of the desk. Inside was the address book Maggie used to keep, her neat handwriting still clear. My lawyer's number was there, Gregory Allen, a man who had stood by us before. I felt the old determination spark inside me, steady as a flame refusing to go out. I sat down again, the folder of papers heavy in my lap. The anger was still there. Yes, but now it had shape. It had direction. I wasn't going to shout or break down. That would give Daniel what he wanted, to make me look unstable, unreasonable. No. I would fight the way Maggie would have fought, with patience, with strategy, with strength hidden behind quiet eyes. I reached for the phone on the table. My fingers hovered for a moment, and I could almost hear Maggie's laugh, soft and encouraging. "Do it, John," I imagined her saying. "Show them who you are." So I opened the drawer, pulled out the leather notebook where I kept important numbers, and flipped it open. Gregory Allen. His name was there, steady, reliable. I picked up the phone and dialed, not yet pressing the last digit, but holding it there, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the turning point. This was where shock became action. I looked around the room one last time, the photos, the furniture, the roses Maggie had planted outside, glowing faintly in the evening light. Everything in this house was worth fighting for. Everything in this house carried her memory, our love, our life. And I knew, without a doubt, I would not let Daniel or anyone else steal that from us. "They think I'm weak," I whispered to the silence, my voice steady now. "But they're about to learn how wrong they are." And with that, I pressed the final number. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I pressed the last number and waited. The line clicked once, then again, and Greg's voice came through steady as ever, the way a good hand feels on your shoulder when the road turns slick. I told him everything. The envelope is on my table, the smile on Daniel's face. The way Emily looked at me like this was normal, like I should just sign and be done. I told him about Maggie's money, $6.8 million. The house, now worth around $700,000. Our life is pressed into paper. Greg didn't rush me. He let me breathe. Then he said what I needed to hear. "We have options." He asked for details. Names on accounts, where the titles sit, which bank still holds the old money market, what's in a safe deposit box, what's only in my head. He reminded me of simple things that matter when people think they can walk over you. Two-factor authentication, call-in passphrases, new passwords that don't sound like an old man's dog or birthday. I wrote everything down as he spoke. The pen felt heavier than usual, but my hand was steady. He said we would build a wall first, then set a snare. He said we would do both quietly. We started with the wall. I called the bank while Greg stayed on the line. The branch manager, a woman named Whitfield, who has watched half this town age with grace and stubbornness, recognized my voice. I asked for an appointment. She said, "Come in after lunch, Mr. Whitaker. We'll give you a private office." When I hung up, Greg told me to gather documents. Deed, trust binder, insurance records, any old accounts that someone could poke. I opened the file drawer and pulled the folders by color, like I'd done for years. Green for the house, blue for investments, red for anything with a deadline. Maggie loved that system. I kept it out of respect, and because it still worked. I drove to the bank in my truck with the cracked dashboard and the seat that sags a little on the left. The sky was a clean blue, like it had been scrubbed. In the parking lot, I sat with the engine off and listened to the tick of cooling metal, the little sounds a machine makes when it's still hot from doing its job. I told myself the same thing. You've done your job, John. Do it again. Inside, Miss Whitfield shook my hand like she meant it. She waved me to a small office with glass walls and blinds, closed the blinds as if she'd read the mood on my face, and waited. I told her, calmly, that there were people in my family asking questions they didn't need to ask and pushing papers they had no right to push. I told her I wanted new passwords on every account I could touch, new call-in passphrases, and a standing note that no changes could be made without me sitting in a chair in front of a banker with a driver's license in one hand and a blood pressure cuff on the other, if that's what it took. She smiled at the last part and said, "We can put a hard note on the profile, in all caps. Branch visit required for ownership changes, no exceptions." She printed the note and slid it across for me to sign. I did. We set up alerts for unusual logins. We added Greg as a trusted contact, not an owner, just a name to call if anyone said I was confused or couldn't speak for myself. I watched her type the words. I felt my breath even out. A wall, brick by brick. When we finished, I asked for something that wasn't on her checklist. I asked if she could help me create a small account with a very specific story. She didn't need to know every reason. I told her I might be closing out a small inheritance remainder and wanted a place to park $240,000 for a short time, then move it to an annuity. I asked if she could create a placeholder file with a draft transfer form. Not an actual transfer, just the paper a man might leave on his desk when he's tired and goes to make coffee. She looked at me like she understood more than I said. She printed the form, filled in what she could, left a few numbers blank, and stamped it draft. She handed me a clean envelope and said, "If you need more props, let me know." I thanked her. The word felt too small. On the drive home, the road seemed shorter. The fields were still brown with winter's old breath, but the fence post stood straight. I thought of Maggie, her hands in the dirt each spring, the way she'd talk to roses like they understood English. "Protect what we built," she used to say, and I answered her out loud in the cab like a man who doesn't care if someone at the light thinks he's talking to a radio. I will. Back home, I called Greg again. We went over the next step. He would draft a simple inheritance summary. Nothing fancy. A letter that said, in plain words, that after debts and taxes, there remained $240,000. He would put it on his letterhead, not as a binding legal opinion, just an informational summary for my files. He would date it recently enough to look current, old enough to look routine. He'd include a note about an annuity quote I was considering. Then he would email me a PDF to print, and he would mail a hard copy in case anyone was snooping in the mailbox and needed bait. He told me a thing I already knew. You don't catch a fox by chasing it across the field. You set the fence so it walks where you want. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the phone beside me. I looked at the grain of the wood. Years ago, I'd sanded it so smooth that a glass would skate if you pushed it wrong. I liked that about it. A thing can be plain and still have a little mischief in it. The phone buzzed. Greg's PDF came through. I printed 2 copies and read them slowly. The numbers looked small on purpose. The words told their simple lie. It wasn't a lie about who I was. It was a lie about what a stranger thought he could touch. The house was quiet. The afternoon light pushed through the blinds and laid lines across the floor like sheet music. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, clipped them with a black binder clip, and put them in a folder. Then I did something against my nature. I wrote on the tab with a heavy marker in big letters, Inheritance, remaining balance $240,000, annuity options. It looked like the kind of folder a man would be proud to wave around. I walked it to my study, set it on the desk off to the right, not centered, the way you set down a thing you plan to come back to after supper. The phone rang again, another bank number. I answered with the calm voice I keep for people who might help or might hurt. The woman on the line introduced herself, said she was calling from the fraud department to verify a digital request. I asked her to explain slowly. She said she had received an online submission to add a new joint owner to one of my older savings accounts. The name submitted was Daniel Carter. The signature attached read John Whitaker. My chest felt tight and hot, but my voice was cool enough to put frost on a window. I said I had not made that request, I would never make that request, and I wanted the attempt flagged and locked. She said it already was, they just needed my confirmation. She told me the IP address pinged from a hotel Wi-Fi near the river. She said the signature looked like a trace of a scanned file. I thanked her for doing her job. I wrote down everything she said. When I hung up, I laid both hands flat on the desk and breathed. Not fear, rage. It came up from the floorboards and through my shoes and into my bones. He had watched me sign something somewhere. He had studied the way my pen curls the tail on a K. He had tried to turn that curl into a key. I walked to the sink, ran cold water, and let it wash over my wrists. I looked out the window. In the garden, the last of the winter birds picked at the feed. The world kept being the world. That steadied me. I dried my hands and called Greg. I told him, short and clean, what the fraud officer had told me. He didn't swear. He didn't gasp. He said, "Good, we have evidence now." He told me to forward the fraud email when it came through, to save the caller's ID in my notes, to write down the time, and to keep everything where we could find it. He said, in a voice that made me think of levees holding back a river, "This only helps us." He told me a thing that made me unclench my teeth. When someone forges your name, they tell you who they are. I hung up and stood a long time without moving, listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator hummed. A leaf knocked once against the window and slid away. I looked at the folder on my desk and felt the plans settle onto my shoulders like a coat that fit. They thought I would sign like a senile old man. They thought I would nod along, put my name where they pointed, and call it love. But I wasn't a passenger in their story. I was the one holding the board. I was the one placing the pieces. The phone lit up, Emily's name on the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered with a smile in my voice because I wanted her to hear steadiness, not suspicion. She asked if I had seen the papers Daniel left. I said I had, and I appreciated the thought, and I would have my lawyer look them over like I do with any paperwork these days. I told her we could sit down together soon, maybe at that little garden cafe she used to love when she was a teenager, the one with the pond and the koi and the waitress who remembers strawberry pie. She sounded relieved, as if I had just agreed to a reasonable compromise. She said Daniel would be pleased to explain anything that was confusing. I said I would bring a pen and questions. I said it lightly, like a joke a father makes to keep the air warm. She laughed the way she did when she was 12 and asked for the car keys just to hold them in her palm. When we hung up, I wrote the time and what she said in my notebook. Not because I planned to use her words against her, because I needed to see the path. I needed to know how we'd gotten from Maggie's roses to a man who signs other men's names. The next morning, I drove to Greg's office with the folder under my arm, the car heater coughing warm breath onto my hands. Greg's building is old brick with a brass handle that always feels colder than the air. He opened the door himself, and we sat in his back room with the heavy oak table and the law books that smelled like the inside of a church pew. I laid out the plan. He added stitches wherever he saw a seam that might split. He would draft a letter to the bank's legal department to confirm the fraud report had been logged. He would request a copy of the attempted change of ownership form with metadata in case we needed to tie it back to a device. He would prepare a basic affidavit for me to sign, saying I had never authorized any joint ownership with Daniel Carter on any account, past or present, and that any attempt to do so should be considered unauthorized. He would also draft the inheritance summary we had discussed, and an annuity quote, just enough detail to look real, not enough to be binding. He handed me a pen, and I signed the affidavit right there. The scratch of the nib on paper sounded like the first rail laid in a long track. We also talked about the house. The deed is in my name. It has been since Maggie and I paid the last mortgage check years back, and she danced in the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder like the victory flag it was. Greg suggested we record a notice of homestead protection with the county. It doesn't change ownership, he said, but it signals to anyone sniffing around that this property is shielded from certain kinds of moves. He wrote the form, and I signed that too. He said we could file it by week's end. He said these were not the moves of a scared man. These were the moves of a careful one. After the paperwork, we talked about people, about how Daniel speaks, about how he uses words like instruments, bright shiny objects, waved to distract your eye from the hand that takes your watch. Greg told me not to confront him yet. He said to let him feel the room the way he's used to feeling it, like it's his. He said to nod where a man like that thinks you'll nod. He said to say things like, I'll think about it, and I see your point, and let's circle back. He said, the more they talk, the more rope they measure. He said, when the time is right, we would show him the rope. Before I left, Greg asked for something unusual. He asked if I had copies of the wedding video. I said there were clips, the fancy montage the photographer posted, and raw footage we hadn't ordered yet. He suggested I ask for all of it, not because he expected a smoking gun, because men like Daniel often talk when they believe the camera loves them. Maybe he bragged to friends. Maybe he made a toast that sounded a little off if you listened with your eyes open. I nodded. I said I would call the videographer. On the drive home, I did. I asked for every clip, every angle, and the raw files if he could share them. He said it would take him a day to pull. I said that was fine. He asked if everything was okay. I told him yes. That was mostly true. At home, the air felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but less stale. I opened the safe where the real documents live and checked them against my list. The trust papers for Maggie's inheritance were there, the kind with real seals and a corporate trustee's name that means more in court than a tired man's word. Harrison and Cole Trust Company, Chicago. I read the clause that blocked transfers without multiple signatures and a meeting. I closed the binder and put it back like a man who knows where he keeps his fire extinguisher. I locked the safe, spun the dial, and let the numbers click past my thumb. Numbers can be friends when people try not to be. I walked through the house slowly, as if I were explaining it to someone who had never seen it. The floor I laid myself. The shelf Maggie wanted was just right, not an inch too high. The picture of Emily in pigtails with chocolate on her face from a birthday cake we baked together because the bakery forgot our order, and we didn't want to tell her. These are the things money can buy in pieces, but never all together. I touched the back of a chair. I spoke softly to Maggie because speaking to her helps me hear myself. They think I'm going to hand them the map, I said, but the map is in my bones. The phone buzzed with a text from Emily. She asked if she could swing by later to pick up a photo album for a thank you note she was writing to the florist. I told her, of course. I added that I had some old boxes in the garage that she might help me label. I wanted time with her. I wanted to see her eyes when Daniel was in the same room. I also wanted Daniel to see the folder on my desk without me making a show of it. It felt strange inviting a fox into the henhouse for a tour. But I wasn't leaving the door open without a latch. I had set alerts on my phone, every login, every email, every noise the house could make when something moved that shouldn't. They arrived just before dusk, the sky already dimming at the edges like a bruise. Emily hugged me tight. Daniel shook my hand. His fingers were soft and warm, a salesman's hand, not a farmer's. We stood in the entryway and made talk that sounds like water running over stones. Emily asked for the album. I told her it was in the study. I watched her step into the room and stop to take in the old pictures on the wall, the yellowing photo of me and Maggie holding a baby in a quilt Maggie's mother sewed. Daniel followed, easy as a cat. His eyes moved in little jerks, not at the pictures. At the desk, in the folder. He tried to pretend he wasn't looking. He failed. I told Emily I had some boxes in the garage and asked if she'd mind helping me grab the lighter ones. Daniel said he would carry them. I said they were only old holiday lights and some blankets, nothing heavy. I wanted Daniel alone with the folder. I wanted him to see the words, remaining balance. $240,000 and feel that strange mix of relief and hunger a thief feels when the job looks smaller and easier than he dreamed. Emily and I stepped into the garage. I kept the door to the house open so I could hear if a drawer slid or a chair moved. We found the boxes I meant for her to find. We laughed about the ugly blue tinsel Maggie loved and how we saved it year after year because it only looked right when it was worn thin. There was joy in that sound, Emily's laugh. I let it rest in my chest for a second. Then we carried the boxes inside. Daniel stood at the study door when we returned, hands in pockets, shoulders easy. He smiled and said he had found the album and put it by the couch. He thanked me for letting them stop by. He said if I needed help with paperwork, he and Emily could swing back tomorrow. I said I had a lawyer for that. I said it friendly way, like a man who hires someone to mow the field because the field got bigger than his mower. The loss in his eyes was quick and small, the way a flicker passes over a pond when a fish changes its mind. They left with a wave. I watched their car lights bend down the road and disappear behind the hedges. Maggie never let me cut too short. I stood there longer than I needed to. Then I went back inside, sat at the study desk, and opened the folder to make sure nothing had moved. The papers were where I left them. One page was a hair-off square. A corner nudged the way a curious fingertip nudges. Good, I thought. He saw what I wanted him to see. He didn't take it. Better? He was cautious. That told me he would try something quiet before he tried something loud. I slept poorly, but I slept. Near dawn, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. An email alert from the bank. Unrecognized device. Attempted login. Old profile. I sat up before the second buzz. Another alert. Password reset request. Denied. I swung my feet to the floor in the same motion I used to use when the baby monitor crackled with a cry. I read the timestamp. Between 3 and 4 in the morning. I read the location. Hotel Wi-Fi near the river. I read the account it targeted, an old savings account I had not touched in years, except to keep it alive. The kind of account most men forget they have. The kind of account a man might use for a quiet transfer if he believed only a little money was left. I made coffee and called Greg. He picked up like he'd been waiting. I gave him the details. He said he would pull a formal request for the bank's security logs. He told me to stay calm and to stay the course. He said a line I liked enough to write down in my notebook and underline. Patience is not weakness, it's aim. By late morning, I had the decoy set exactly where I wanted it. Folder on the desk, a draft transfer form peeking like a bookmark from the middle. The inheritance summary on top with the figure plain as day. An annuity quote tucked in the back, just visible enough to suggest I was moving money out of reach. I also printed a single sheet that said, "Meeting with attorney, Tuesday 1:30 p.m., and placed it under a paperweight Maggie gave me with a pressed daisy inside. It wasn't true. It didn't need to be. It needed to give shape to a stranger's imagination. If he believed time was short, he would hurry. If he hurried, he would make mistakes. In the afternoon, the videographer emailed a link with raw files from the wedding. I downloaded them and watched a few seconds here and there. Laughter, clinking glasses, the band warming up. I stopped when I reached a clip of Daniel at the bar with his friends. No smoking gun, not yet, just the looseness in his shoulders that grows when a man thinks he's already won. I closed the laptop and let it sit. I didn't need more proof to act. I needed only to keep the shape of the man in front of me. Emily called near supper. She asked if Daniel could swing by in the morning to help me move a cabinet in the study. Simple, helpful. The kind of errand a new son-in-law uses to impress himself. I said yes, that would be kind. I told her I had an errand myself at the courthouse to file a homestead notice, just a little thing Greg suggested. She didn't ask what it was. She said that sounded smart. She said Daniel would come by after breakfast. After we hung up, I stood in the doorway of the study and looked at the room the way a hunter looks at a clearing before dusk. The chair was pulled back a little, like someone had just stood. The folder was smiling its careful smile. The pen on the blotter was uncapped, lying there like an invitation. I capped it and put it back in the cup. No need to invite. The invitation had been sent. I ate a simple supper. Soup from a can that tastes better if you crack pepper into it and add a slice of cheese on toast. I washed the bowl, dried it, and set it in the rack. I turned off every light except the lamp by Maggie's chair and the soft night light in the hall. I walked the house once more, not like a soldier on patrol, more like a father locking up after a birthday party, picking up a ribbon here, straightening a picture there. In our bedroom, I opened the top drawer and took out the little leather pouch where I keep things I don't want to misplace. Inside, I put a small flash drive, empty for now, and the index card where I'd written the bank officer's number. I slid the pouch under my pillow. It felt like overkill. It felt like prudence. I slept better for it. Morning came clean and cold. Daniel knocked on time. He wore a sweater with the sleeves pushed up and a smile shaped like effort that costs nothing. I thanked him for coming. We moved the cabinet 2 inches and made a grunting sound to make it feel like work. He looked around as if to be polite. His eyes landed, where I wanted them to land, on the folder. He didn't step closer. He didn't need to. He had seen enough last night to know what to look for. He talked casually about how confusing the market was, about how people lose money if they don't plan, about how he could help me not make mistakes. He said these things like a man offering to carry your suitcase. I nodded. I said I'd keep that in mind. He offered to pick up lunch sometime, his treat. I said the cafe with the koi might be nice. He smiled like I'd handed him a map with a red X on it. When he left, he thanked me again for trusting him. He said trust like it had 3 syllables. True Urst. I wondered how many times he'd practiced that face. When the door closed, I stood in the quiet and let my shoulders drop. I told the house what I told myself. They think I've already lost. They think they're inches from the prize. A man takes more risks when he thinks the distance is small. He'll jump a fence instead of looking for the gate. That's when he tears his pants. That's when he leaves a piece of cloth on a nail. Evidence, a scrap to hold up later. At noon, I went to the courthouse and filed the homestead notice with a clerk who has seen more family fights than most judges. She stamped the paper and squared it against the counter twice before pushing it back to me. She said, "Good move." She didn't ask for details. I didn't offer any. Outside on the steps, I called Greg and told him it was done. He said he had received confirmation from the bank's fraud department and their legal team would hold the attempted change of ownership for him. He said we were exactly where we needed to be. He asked if I could meet for lunch soon, not as a lawyer, just as a friend who likes duck confit on a cold day. I smiled at the timing. I told him I might have a better use for lunch. By late afternoon, I had made 3 calls. One to the cafe to reserve a quiet table by the pond, the kind of table where voices stay low and truth floats to the surface like a fish looking for light. One to a mobile notary I've used before to sign documents when going to an office isn't worth the drive. and one to Emily inviting her and Daniel to lunch the next day, my treat, to talk about planning. She said that sounded wonderful. She said Daniel would bring the papers. I told her I would bring a pen. Before dark, the videographer sent another link. More raw files. I watched a minute of Daniel speaking with a friend on the patio, his hands drawing shapes in the air the way a man does when he's writing a future only he can see. I turned the sound up, then down, then off. Sometimes the mouth tells you more than the words. I saved the file and closed the laptop. I would send it to Greg later. I didn't need it to move forward. It felt like a wind at my back. I walked to the study and looked at the folder one last time. I lifted the top page and slid a sticky note half an inch higher so the words "Remaining Balance, $240,000" sat on their own little stage. I set my reading glasses on the paper as if I'd stepped away and would be right back. I checked the window latch. I checked the drawer with the real documents and tapped it twice, a private habit, a way to tell myself the lock had caught. I straightened the chair and stood in the doorway. This was where the path bent, not in a shout, not in a slam of doors. In a series of quiet yeses and careful nos, in a father's voice that stays warm while the mind sharpens like a blade in water. I felt the difference in my chest. The ache of betrayal had cooled. In its place was something colder and cleaner. Purpose. I turned off the study light and walked toward the kitchen. The house settled as it always does in the evening, Wood taking a breath, pipes clearing their throats. I pulled Maggie's old apron off the hook and put it on, even though I didn't need it, just to feel the tie around my waist, the bow I still make too low because hers was always higher and neater. I made tea instead of coffee so I could sleep later. I stood at the sink with the mug in my hands and looked out at the garden where the roses sleep and wait for spring. I spoke to her one more time. "They think this ends with my signature," I said. "It won't." On the table by the door, my leather notebook lay open to a fresh page. I wrote, in block letters, "Tomorrow lunch. Greg nearby. Notary on call. Phone recording ready. Smile. Listen. Let him talk." Under that, I wrote a line that made me smile despite myself. They don't know what I'm holding. They don't know what happens next. I closed the notebook and placed it beside my keys. The folder sat in the study like a stage set, the lines written, the props arranged, the actors unaware that the audience had changed. I felt a calm I hadn't felt since before the wedding, the kind of calm a man feels when the plan is simple and the stakes are everything. They think they've won. They think the distance is inches. But I have time. I have patience. I have the truth. And I have this too, one small decision that will turn the board in my favor. I will let them see what they want to see. I will let them reach. And when they do, I will be standing right there, hand steady, pen ready, witness in the corner, law at my back, and Maggie's voice in my ear, saying the words that matter most. Protect what we built. I turned off the lamp, locked the front door, and let the house go quiet. Tomorrow would be a different kind of day, not the day they planned, the day I began to take it all back. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun and watched the living room take on honest gray, showing lines in the wood. The oak chair by the window waited, the chair I built when Emily could curl into my lap. The house was awake, just listening. I poured coffee and opened the curtains. The yard was frost-tipped and quiet, a held breath. I said Maggie's name aloud, the way a man checks a gate before a storm. Protect what we built, I whispered. Then I set the cup down and faced the study. The plan sat there like a quiet engine. Today would be the turn, not a roar, just a click, the sound of a lock sliding back. I breathed once, steady, picked up my jacket, and walked to meet the day. At 9, I called the cafe and confirmed the table by the koi pond, the corner near the hedges where conversations tuck themselves into leaves. The hostess promised shade and a quiet breeze. At 10, I called the mobile notary and asked him to wait in his car until I texted one word. Ready? He said he would bring 2 pens and a calm face. At 10:15, I texted Greg to bring his appetite, not his briefcase. He sent a thumbs up and a line about duck confit that made me smile despite myself. After that, I walked the house, checked each latch, and stood in the study doorway like a man surveying a field before opening the gate. Slowly. Before I left, I checked the props one more time. The decoy inheritance summary sat on the desk, neat and believable, with the top line set at $240,000. A draft annuity quote peeked from the folder to suggest I was already moving. In a separate envelope, I carried the real documents for the trust that holds Maggie's $6.8 million, guarded by a corporate trustee who does not answer to charm. Those pages went into the glove compartment, sealed and quiet. I locked the house, pocketed my keys, and paused in the hall by the family photos. There we were in winter coats. There we were on the porch with sparklers. There we were around a cake with too many candles. I straightened a frame and told myself the picture would be righted today, too, for us both. They arrived right on time. Emily first, her hand tucked into Daniel's arm, the same way she used to hook her hand around my elbow when she wanted an extra scoop of ice cream. My daughter looked hopeful. Daniel looked rehearsed. His pale blue suit caught the light. His smile measured warmth without heat. We hugged and sat. The waiter poured water and left. The pond glittered as if someone had shaken a pocket full of coins into it. For a minute, I let the calm do its good work on our nerves. Daniel opened with practiced kindness. He spoke about family alignment, streamlining decisions, and safeguarding the house so it would never be sold against my wishes. He used Maggie's name like a key. Legacy, love, soft words. I nodded and answered in short phrases. I understand. We will see. I kept my voice even and let Emily feel safety in it. She touched my wrist. Dad, this is just planning, she said. We want things simple, so you never worry. I smiled the way a coach smiles at a player who does not know the clock is nearly out. Simplicity is good, I said. Agreement comes after clarity. For everyone, truly. When the menus were cleared, he slid fresh papers toward me. The top page called itself an acknowledgement, but the lines beneath asked for consent to information requests and balance confirmations for accounts tied to a future trust. It sounded like a handshake and worked like a key. I set the page down and folded my napkin. I told him I had consulted my attorney and would not sign today. He said, of course, he respected that. Then he filled the space with phrases about saving time and keeping things clean, polishing a car that would never be mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the specific tone the bank uses when it wants my attention. I did not look. I knew the rhythm like a scout tapping a drum. I kept my face easy and asked Daniel about their hotel by the river. He said the view was good and the staff attentive. I said older buildings sometimes have spotty internet, sometimes it drops in the middle of important work. He laughed and said he did not work on his honeymoon. I nodded and let the quiet deepen so the words I had not spoken could sit between us and breathe. For now. Emily leaned forward. If you need more time, we can wait, she said. Daniel squeezed her hand and added that the basics could still be agreed upon today, so the bank would be ready for a family trust. Clean lines, he said. I told them I had brought a snapshot of where things stand. I placed the decoy summary on the table and let the number breathe. 240,000. Emily read it and whispered, "Is that all?" I told her it was what remained after taxes and debts and that I was considering a modest annuity. Daniel called it wise. He said small numbers are easier to manage and he could help place them well, carefully. Then she unfolded a letter from her purse and laid it beside the decoy. My name was printed at the top. The logo looked crisp enough to fool anyone not used to reading the shape of real law. "Dad, this came to our mailbox," she said. "It says you are transferring assets to me privately. It says Daniel should be excluded, so things will be fair in case of divorce." The air thinned around my shoulders. Daniel put on a face he probably practiced in the mirror. Hurt, then concern, then worldly calm. He said he did not know what it was, but he feared I might be listening to bad advice. He told Emily that secrets can poison a family faster than anything. I looked at the pond. A leaf spun in a slow circle, then drifted toward the shallow ledge. I thought of Maggie trimming roses while explaining patience to me like a recipe. Let time do its simmering. When I lifted my eyes, I saw Greg walking along the hedge, casual as a man studying shadows. He tipped his head at the window. I texted one word to the notary: ready. Then I opened my phone and told them I wanted them to watch something small. I played the wedding clip Greg had found. Daniel stood at the bar with friends, a drink raised, his voice carrying. Not rich yet, but give me a month. You will see. The laugh that followed was not joy. It was a plan stretching its legs. Emily stared at the screen. Daniel stared at me. Emily's face changed. First worry, then doubt, then a quiet that looked like understanding when it settled. Daniel took a long breath that brought time. He said people say foolish things at weddings. He said the letter could be from anyone. He said he wanted only to help. I told him the bank logs were not anybody's and the timing was not a coincidence. A denied change request had landed in my inbox while he praised the view by the river. I said the signature on that request traced back to a device linked to Emily's tablet, and that only 2 people knew her old login. He swallowed and looked past me, as if a door might open by accident and rescue him from this moment now. Truly. The notary stepped inside. He did not look at us. He waited near the door and opened his little case. Greg came in and took a stool at the bar, asked for water, and turned the glass with one finger as if he were checking a clock. I told Daniel I was giving him one clean way out. I reached into my jacket and removed a short agreement. It released any claim he might pretend to have on property titled in my name, including the $700,000 house. It acknowledged that the inheritance sat in a corporate trust beyond private reach. And it offered an annulment, quick and quiet, with no demand for money from either side. He laughed once. It sounded like a bark that missed the tree. Annulment, he said, after a week. After. Do you hear yourself? He turned to Emily and called me confused. He told her we could find a lawyer who understood modern planning. He said money should serve family, not stay locked away. He told her I was afraid of the future. Emily did not move. She kept her eyes on the table because sometimes a person needs to look at wood to keep from falling apart. I told Daniel this was me being faithful to my promise. Protect what we built. I said the garden would not be sold for a hustle. He tried one more angle. He said he would accuse me of defamation. He said he would argue I was incompetent. He said I was isolating Emily. He talked faster, words stacked like crates in a truck that had already begun to sway. I let him finish, then turned my phone face up so he could read the subject lines from the bank. Courtesy notification. Change request denied. Security alert. Attempted login blocked. He stared like a man looking at his own footprints in wet cement. Greg never left the bar. The notary checked his watch and waited, patient as a winter tree. I told Daniel the plan had failed. I told him we could walk across the street to Greg's office and begin the hard version. Injunctions, police, record requests. A judge who hears everything we just said, without coy or linen. Or he could choose the simple version. He asked what would happen if he refused both. I answered him with a sentence I did not raise above a murmur. You will lose more loudly. He looked at Emily, and for the first time I saw fear there, not for me, not for money, but for the reflection of herself in a future she did not want. He picked up the pen, put it down, and picked it up again. He read, he swallowed. He pointed at the clause about my house and asked whether it included the garden and garage apartment if I ever built one. I said it included everything on the deed. He nodded because numbers were finally speaking a language he understood. He signed the first page. The notary stepped forward, watched the line of ink dry, and stamped a seal with a firm push. He signed the second page. He paused at the third, then signed it too. He slid the pen back and did not look up. When it was done, he stood up and told Emily she was making a mistake she would carry for the rest of her life. He told me I would die alone. He told the waiter the steak had been overcooked. Words scattered like loose change from a pocket no one wanted anymore. He left without his sunglasses and stepped into the sunlight with a flinch. The door swung shut behind him, and the room sighed like a person who has been holding a heavy box too long. Emily leaned against me and cried, quiet at first, then like rain when a roof begins to speak. I put my arm around her and let the sound pass through me. "It is over," I said. "You are safe now." She nodded and held on. The pond whispered behind us. I watched a koi surface, tilt, and slip away, bright and unafraid. The waiter brought the check and set it down without looking at it, as if he knew this was not a bill for food. I paid and left a tip that said, "Thank you for giving us this corner of peace." Greg joined us at the door and handed me an envelope with copies and another addressed to the bank's legal department requesting preservation of the logs and video timestamps. He said he would file the homestead notice this afternoon and email me the receipt. He thanked the notary with a nod and said we had done the right thing at the right speed. Emily managed a small smile for him. She asked if this would be public. He said we had kept it private on purpose. He said she would be free to walk forward without a headline attached to her name. She whispered thank you, and it sounded like a person finding dry ground. Outside, the air felt golden, like the afternoon had decided to be kind. Emily asked if I knew for certain. I told her I had known enough to act. They thought I was weak, I said. Now they see the cost of underestimating a father. She squeezed my arm the way she did when bad weather rattled the windows at night. I drove her home, and we did not talk much. Sometimes quiet is the best promise. At her apartment door, she hugged me and said she was sorry. I told her sorrow can wait. We would mend the torn places one careful stitch at a time. When I got back to the house, I walked straight to the study and picked up the decoy folder. I studied the bold numbers and the simple lies that had drawn a hunter out of the brush. Then I fed the pages through the shredder and listened to the blades chew, clean, and even until the bin filled with thin ribbons. I emptied them into a bag, tied it tight, and set it by the back door. Then I opened the safe and took out the real trust binder with its heavy seal and cold certainty. I pressed my hand against the cover and thanked every hard day that made this possible. An email from the bank landed with a soft chime. We confirm receipt of counsel's letter and will preserve all relevant records. Please accept our apologies for any concern caused. I replied with 2 clear sentences and called Greg to say the message had arrived. He laughed and said the bridge held. He asked if I wanted to meet tomorrow to finish the filings. I said yes. Then I stepped out to the yard and watched a line of birds cross above the maple, small dark commas stitching the sky into a sentence that meant relief. Emily came by after dusk with a small paper bag. Inside were the torn pieces of the fake letter that had landed in her mailbox. She asked if we could burn them together. We lit the grill and watched the bits curl into ash. She stood close and said she wanted to believe people could be better. I told her that belief is a light and a responsibility. Keep the light. Guard it well. She nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. The neighborhood settled one porch at a time. Somewhere a dog barked once, then decided enough had been said. Before bed, I wrote a single line in my notebook so I would not forget the sound a lie makes when it runs out of road. His voice broke when he realized the game was over. I underlined it, not as a trophy, as a reminder that truth has a weight you can hear when it lands. I put the notebook back by the keys and turned off the lamps. The house breathed, slow and certain. I stood in the hallway and ran my palm over the wall where Emily once measured her height in pencil marks. Time keeps those marks alive in a way photographs cannot. I slept well for the first time in weeks and woke to a morning that felt like untying a knot. There is still work ahead. The filings, the notices, the careful guarding that never really ends. But the storm itself has blown past. What remains is cleanup and repair and the gentle tending of a daughter's heart. I poured water into a glass and looked out at Maggie's roses resting in their winter beds. "Protect what we built," I whispered. Then I smiled because today those words sounded less like fear and more like a vow kept. Tomorrow we will sit in Greg's office with the blinds half drawn, oak table polished, and a small recorder humming beside a stack of forms. He will file the annulment with the court clerk, deliver notices to the trustee in Chicago, and walk me through one last review of the homestead protection on the $700,000 deed. I will change the passwords, close the dormant savings account, and put fresh batteries in the cameras by the porch. Quiet work, necessary work, the kind that keeps a house steady after a storm. Feeling overlooked and doubted by your own family is tough, isn't it? If you believe everyone deserves to be recognized and for the truth to be protected, comment the keyword, justice. Now let's see what they'll do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke the next morning to a silence that felt different. Not the silence of suspicion or fear, but the silence of a house finally allowed to breathe again. The light fell across the hardwood floors Maggie and I had refinished decades ago, and for the first time in months, I felt the walls weren't listening for trouble. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the one where Daniel once tried to slip a contract across the wood, and I realized the storm had broken. The papers were signed, the accounts secure, the house safe. Chapter after chapter of betrayal had led me here, and now it was time to finish what had begun in that office with Greg and the stack of legal files. Daniel had vanished. No calls, no texts, not even the kind of brazen emails he once sent asking for account details he thought I was too old to notice. Greg confirmed what I had suspected. Daniel had no standing. The annulment had been accepted. The attempted fraud was on record. If he pushed again, the district attorney would open an investigation. I imagined him sitting in some half-lit apartment, the curtains drawn, his phone buzzing with messages he couldn't answer. That was no longer my burden to carry. The rope had been cut, and I wasn't the one dangling. Emily stayed quiet for a while, retreating to her friend's apartment while she let the dust settle. She called me in the evenings, her voice softer than it had been in months. She told me she had returned the ring, that the jeweler gave her back only a fraction of what it cost, but the act itself had felt like cutting a stone from her chest. She cried when she told me she had boxed up the photos from the honeymoon Daniel never really paid for. And in those calls, I began to hear the voice of the daughter I had raised, not the one Daniel had bent into shadows. My own victory was not in shouting or in gloating. It came in a steady way. The numbers stayed where they belonged. The $6.8 million Maggie left, untouched by hands that had no right to it. The $700,000 home, the deed now ironclad with protections Greg had filed. The relief of knowing that what we built over a lifetime together had not been stolen in a single season of deceit. I remember standing on the porch one afternoon, looking out over the yard and whispering into the breeze. "We kept it safe, Maggie." And in that moment, I felt her beside me. I knew money alone couldn't heal the wound, so I made a choice. $50,000 went straight into a charitable fund under Maggie's name. Over time, more would follow. It wasn't about size, it was about direction. It was about taking what had been twisted into a weapon and reshaping it into something that gave instead of took. At the community center, when I signed the papers, the director smiled with wet eyes and said, "This will mean more than you know." Emily came with me to that first meeting, and she stood there in silence, her eyes tracing her mother's name on the plaque. She didn't need to say a word. Her tears spoke enough. Daniel, meanwhile, became a ghost in town. Stories floated back to me. A missed payment here, a landlord's warning there. Friends who had once toasted him at the wedding now whispered jokes about his financial strategies. He had become the kind of man people shake their heads at, a warning wrapped in a name. Some said he was working odd jobs. Others said he was running from debts. Either way, the shine was gone. His circle had shrunk to nothing, and that was justice in its own quiet form. The contrast was sharp. In my home, the room slowly filled with life again. Emily began to stop by more often, bringing groceries, asking if I wanted to walk the park trail with her. On Sundays, she came to the garden wearing Maggie's old sun hat, her hands in the soil like they used to be when she was young. We didn't talk about Daniel. We talked about tomatoes, rain, and which patch of soil looked ready for beans. That was victory, the return of ordinary joy. I will not lie. The hurt lingered. There were nights I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's voice when she had once defended Daniel against me. There were mornings when the smell of coffee reminded me of the day he sat across from me, pushing that contract toward my hands like I was already buried in the ground. But with each passing day, the weight lifted. I told myself, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. That sentence became a kind of prayer, a shield, and slowly I believed it. Daniel tried once more, of course. A letter, thick with words like mistake and forgive. He asked for a meeting. He promised it would just be us. I read it at the same kitchen table, the one Maggie and I had bought with our first paycheck, and I set it down. I took out a clean piece of stationery and wrote one line. I don't need your apology. I have my life. I mailed it back inside his envelope, so he'd know the silence was mine, not his. And when I walked out of the post office, I felt taller than I had in years. The lesson for me was clear. Parents must build fences, not just fields. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender. We give, yes, we pay tuition, we buy cars, we host weddings. But if we do not guard ourselves, our gifts become open doors for wolves. Children, too, must learn. Blind love is a cliff. It will carry you forward, but it won't catch you when you fall. And for people in this modern world, the truth is simple. Greed has not changed. It is still the same blade it was 100 years ago, and it still cuts deepest into the hands that wield it. The months after were calm. I sold a small plot of land Maggie and I had bought years ago as an investment, transferring the money into safer funds. I kept the house, of course, but I made it clear in my will that if Emily wanted it after I was gone, she would have to share it with no one but herself. I updated every document, every file. Greg and I built a wall of paper so high that no storm could breach it. That work gave me peace. I began to live again. I joined a volunteer group at the river path, picking up litter on Saturdays. I sat on the new bench we built in the park, with Maggie's name etched into a bronze plaque. I cooked dinners Emily loved as a child, chili, meatloaf, and pies Maggie used to make. I watched the news without flinching, because the worst news was behind me. I started to sleep with the windows open, letting the night air in without fear. And most of all, I laughed again, deep belly laughter that felt like air rushing into a cave too long closed. Emily healed in her own way. Some friends distanced themselves, embarrassed by how much they had believed in Daniel's charm. Others stood by her, though quietly. She learned the difference between real loyalty and shallow applause. Sometimes she cried in the garden, pressing her face into her sleeve. Sometimes she laughed when the tomatoes sprouted faster than expected. But slowly, the weight fell from her shoulders, too. One night on the porch, she asked me, "Do you forgive him?" I told her the truth. I forgive myself. I forgive you. As for him, I won't carry him further. He can walk on his own. She pressed her cheek to my shoulder and whispered, "That's enough." And it was. Daniel never came back. He became a lesson written in absence. People mentioned his name less and less until it was just a shadow at the edge of memory. Emily and I didn't need closure from him. We had it from ourselves. His failure was public, his isolation complete. My victory was private, my peace whole. That was the balance I had been searching for. By late spring, I began attending committee meetings at the community center. We planned raised garden beds for seniors who couldn't kneel anymore. I measured wood, I hauled soil, I hammered nails. The smell of fresh lumber reminded me of the house Maggie and I built, and I found comfort in that cycle. Old skills making new life. I wasn't just defending anymore. I was building again. That, too, was victory. The journey taught me more than one lesson, and those lessons must be spoken aloud. Parents, set boundaries even when it hurts. Children, choose partners who love you for who you are, not for what you bring. And all of us, in this fast, greedy world, must remember that character is the only inheritance worth protecting. Money can build walls, but character builds homes. One afternoon, after painting the new garden beds, I walked back home and stood in the living room. The light came in golden, catching on the frames that held family photos. Maggie's smile, Emily at her graduation, even a picture of us with the old truck I'd sold years ago. I realized then that I was no longer looking back with pain. I was looking forward with calm. I whispered, "I'm free now, Maggie, truly free." And I felt her in the quiet, agreeing. I know the story isn't over. Life never stops. But the chapter of betrayal is closed. I have peace, I have my daughter, I have my home, and I have myself. Daniel's shadow cannot touch that. And as I sit on the porch with the evening air settling softly around me, I know one more truth. I don't need their apologies. I don't need their approval. I have my life, and that is enough. And so this chapter ends, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the steady rhythm of a man who kept what was his and found something greater. A man who chose dignity over revenge, love over loss, and peace over chaos. Tomorrow I will attend another community meeting. Tomorrow I will plant another seed. Tomorrow I will walk with Emily in the park. Tomorrow is mine again. And that is the true victory. The mornings in my new life are steady, calm, almost tender. I rise early, brew a pot of coffee, and sit by the wide window of my modest apartment that looks out over the park. The apartment isn't as large as the house Maggie and I once filled with years of laughter and memory, but it has something the old house lost long before the betrayal: peace. I keep the place tidy, shelves lined with books, a few photos of Maggie, and a desk where I track my accounts. I no longer carry the weight of suspicion or dread. I guard the inheritance with quiet confidence, the $6.8 million secured, the $700,000 home protected under the trust that now bears Maggie's name. The documents are ironclad, the bank statements clean. For the first time in years, I manage everything without looking over my shoulder. I've taken to spending my afternoons at the community center, the very one where Maggie used to volunteer. I joined a small group that plants flowers along the Riverwalk and prepares meals for seniors who can't cook anymore. There's a satisfaction in stirring a pot of soup or putting a trowel into the soil, a reminder that money is only as valuable as what it allows you to give. One of the women in the group handed me an old photograph one day, an image of Maggie at a charity event, smiling, her hair tied back the way she wore it when she wanted nothing between her and the work. I held that photo as though it were gold, and in truth, it was worth more than gold. Daniel's life, from what I hear, is the mirror opposite of mine now. Word travels even when you don't look for it. He lost his job not long after the annulment. Employers don't take kindly to whispers of fraud, and in a small town, whispers echo louder than shouts. He moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place with peeling paint on the stairwell and neighbors who don't exchange names. People who once shook his hand at weddings or clinked glasses with him at bars now cross the street. The shine has worn off, and what's left is the bare truth. He tried to reach me once more. A letter slipped under my apartment door, written in a hurried scrawl. Words like mistake, regret, and forgive filled the page. I read it through twice, then set it down. I whispered out loud, though only the walls heard me. I don't need your apology. I have my life. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer. and never replied. That silence was my final boundary, my way of saying the chapter is closed. Emily has changed too. At first, she struggled under the shadow of what Daniel left behind, friends who drifted, whispers she couldn't silence. But she has grown stronger. She visits me every weekend, sometimes bringing muffins from the bakery, sometimes just herself and her smile. She works long hours, but saves her evenings for walking with me in the park. We don't talk much about Daniel anymore. We talk about the garden, about her work, about Maggie's favorite recipes. In the quiet, she has found her own balance, and in her eyes, I see that she understands the depth of what nearly slipped away. One late afternoon, while volunteering at the community center, an older man approached me with a box. Inside was a stack of letters, photographs, and even a program from Maggie's college graduation. He had kept them for decades, part of an old archive, and now he thought they belonged with me. As I sifted through those pages, I realized how full life can be when it is measured in memory, not in money. The smell of old paper, the sight of her name written in careful script, it was more powerful than any bank account balance. It reminded me that our true inheritance is love, character, and the mark we leave on others. That is the lesson I want parents to hear. Protect what you've built, not only for your children, but also for yourself. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is a form of love, a way of saying your sacrifices have value. And to children, the lesson is sharper. Blind love can destroy you if it is tied to greed or manipulation. Love wisely and never let desire for wealth eclipse the truth. And for all of us in this modern world, the truth is plain. Money reveals character. It doesn't create it. And character is the only inheritance no one can steal. I remind myself of these truths every morning when I water the small potted plants Maggie's photo overlooks. I whisper, "We did it right, Maggie. We kept what mattered safe." And in the hush that follows, I feel her presence like sunlight. Daniel's downfall is not my triumph. It is his own doing. But the contrast matters. He is alone in a rented apartment, chasing shadows of a fortune he never earned. I am here, free, alive, steady, surrounded by the rhythm of a daughter who learned her lesson, and a community that welcomes me without suspicion. That is enough. The park near my apartment has become my sanctuary. Children run along the paths, their laughter ringing like bells. Older couples walk hand in hand, slow and steady. I sit on a bench with Maggie's name etched into a bronze plaque, and I smile. Every evening, the sunlight turns the grass golden, and I whisper, "Every day proves I chose right." It is not bitterness that fills me now, but gratitude. Gratitude for lessons learned, for strength reclaimed, for peace hard-won. When I close my eyes, I see Maggie's face. I hear Emily's laughter, and I know the truth. I don't need Daniel's words. I don't need his remorse. I don't need his return. I have myself. I have love that is real. I have peace that is mine, and that is everything. And so this final chapter closes with no shouts, no chaos, no courtroom drama. Just the sound of leaves rustling in the park, the smell of coffee cooling on the table, and the steady beat of a heart that has survived betrayal, claimed its dignity, and found its way home. Every step I take now, whether toward the garden beds we build for the seniors or along the trail with Emily, is proof that I am exactly where I belong. The story ends not with defeat, not with rage, but with peace. And as the evening light drapes itself across my shoulders, I smile to myself and whisper, "I am free." The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.